The departures hall at JFK was a blur of movement screens, flickering voices rising, the metallic rhythm of rolling suitcases, echoing like an endless heartbeat. But amid all the noise, there was a small island of stillness, a woman and her son standing at the airline counter as the world rushed past them. Aaliyah Brooks clutched her worn leather purse as if it could keep her from falling apart. Her palms were damp, her knuckles pale. She had counted every dollar 3 times that morning. Rent-paid groceries, rationed tips, from 2 night shifts cleaning offices. It was barely enough for 2 one-way tickets to Seattle. Barely enough to keep her son Noah safe. "Ma'am," the clerk said softly, his voice wrapped in sympathy. "You're short. $42.60. The number hung in the air like a sentence. Aaliyah froze. Her throat tightened. She reached instinctively into her wallet, though she already knew it was empty. "Please," she whispered, "can't you hold the ticket? Just for an hour." "I'm sorry," he said gently. "Full payment only." Behind her, someone coughed impatiently. Another voice sighed. And in that crowded terminal, shame burned hotter than the fluorescent lights above her. Noah, only 6, tugged on her coat. "Mommy, are we not going home?" She forced a smile, though her eyes shimmered. "We will, sweetheart, I promise." But promises didn't fill empty wallets. She began to gather her scattered coins, her fingers trembling when a low, steady voice cut through the noise. "Add her ticket to mine." The clerk blinked, startled. Aaliyah turned startled too, and saw him. A man stood a few feet behind her, tall and sharply composed. He wasn't loud, but his presence made people step aside without a word. His suit was dark, unbranded, yet unmistakably expensive. In his hand, he held a black card between 2 fingers, with the ease of someone for whom money was simply air. "No need," Aaliyah stammered. "I can't. It's done." He interrupted, his tone calm but final. His eyes met hers briefly, clear gray and unreadable. Something in that gaze startled her. Not pity, not arrogance, recognition. It was as if he'd seen her before. The clerk swiped the card quickly. Aaliyah's pulse raced. She wanted to protest, to return the kindness she couldn't afford, but no words would come. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." The man gave a short nod and turned away. Yet just before he did, his eyes dropped to her hands, rough and calloused from years of scrubbing floors. His expression changed just slightly, a flicker of memory crossing his composed face. Then he looked away, as if nothing had happened. Later, as she sat with Noah in the waiting area, the relief of having the tickets began to fade. Gratitude mixed with unease, that uncomfortable weight of owing something you can never repay. Her son leaned against her, watching the planes outside. "Mommy?" He whispered, "That man, the one who helped us. Do you think he's an angel?" Aaliyah smiled faintly, brushing his curls aside. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe he's just someone who remembered how to be kind." But deep inside, she wondered why today. When boarding was announced, she gripped Noah's hand and stepped onto the jet bridge. The metallic tunnel hummed beneath her feet. She tried to let go of the tension to focus on getting home. But when she reached her row, her heart skipped. There he was again, the same man from the counter, seated across the aisle, 1 row ahead, reading quietly, as though nothing in the world could reach him. Aaliyah swallowed hard. Fate, it seemed, had more plans. For the first hour, the flight was calm. Noah pressed his face against the window, naming the clouds. Aaliyah watched him with tender exhaustion, the kind only mothers know. She'd fought so hard to keep him safe, to stay afloat in a world that kept pushing her under. But then his laughter faded. "Mommy, I feel funny." His skin burned to her touch. His small body trembled. Panic seized her. She rummaged through her bag. No medicine, just half a bottle of water and a wrinkled tissue. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, but her voice broke. "Just close your eyes." Across the aisle a page turned, then stopped. "Excuse me," the man said quietly. "He's feverish, isn't he?" She looked up startled, meeting his gaze again. "He's fine," she lied. "I'll manage." But Noah whimpered, and the lie dissolved. The man pressed the call button. "A cool bottle of water," he told the attendant, "and children's acetaminophen. Quickly." His tone wasn't commanding, it was absolute. Within minutes, help arrived. He handed Aaliyah the bottle, steadying her shaking hand as she cooled her son's forehead. His touch was light, precise, like someone who'd done this before. When Noah's breathing slowed, relief flooded her chest. She turned to the stranger. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done." He leaned back, his face unreadable. No one should have to handle it alone. Hours passed. The cabin lights dimmed the world below, turning into scattered stars. Noah slept peacefully, his head in Aaliyah's lap. She brushed a tear away, grateful, yet confused. Something about this man, his voice, his calm, his presence felt hauntingly familiar. Like an echo from a life she couldn't remember. And when the plane began its descent, he glanced at her once more. A single fleeting look, but enough to make her heart twist. Because in that look, there wasn't just concern. There was guilt. Deep, quiet guilt, the kind that doesn't belong to a stranger. Hours later, as the plane touched down in Chicago for an unexpected emergency landing, Aaliyah's thoughts refused to rest. She kept seeing his eyes, that gray sadness behind all his calm. Who was he really? And why, when he looked at her, did it feel as if he was the one seeking forgiveness? Sometimes the kindest hearts carry the heaviest secrets. If this story touched something inside you, a memory, a wound, or a quiet hope, stay a little longer. There's more to their journey, and perhaps a bit of yours within it too. The flight attendants were moving briskly through the cabin, apologizing for the unexpected layover in Chicago. Most passengers groaned or reached for their phones, but Aaliyah just exhaled slowly, brushing her son's curls from his forehead. Noah had finally fallen asleep again, his small hand curled around her wrist like an anchor. Across the aisle, the stranger sat motionless. His face was turned toward the window, where the fading sun threw soft gold across the wing. He looked like a man carved from restraint, shoulders too still, eyes too quiet. Aaliyah told herself not to look, not to think, not to feel. Yet every few minutes her gaze drifted back. The captain's voice broke through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a mechanical issue, we will be landing in Chicago for the night. Please remain seated until further notice." A low murmur filled the air. Noah stirred. "Mommy, are we home?" He mumbled sleepily. "Not yet, sweetheart," she whispered, smoothing his blanket. "Just another stop on the way." When the plane finally landed, chaos followed crying children, impatient business travelers, the shuffle of restless feet. Aaliyah carried Noah down the narrow aisle, his head resting heavily against her shoulder. He was too warm again. Her back ached, but she kept walking. She didn't expect anyone to notice her exhaustion, but he did. The man, the stranger, was suddenly beside her at the exit, offering a steadying hand as she nearly lost balance on the metal step. She hesitated, pride flickering, then accepted. His grip was firm, certain. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded, eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't have to carry all that alone." His words lingered long after they'd stepped into the crowded terminal. Inside the airport, confusion reigned. Flights canceled, lines forming, announcements blaring. The air smelled of coffee and impatience. Aaliyah made her way to the service desk, clutching Noah's hand. The clerk, weary apologetic, explained that hotel vouchers were limited. Families with children will be prioritized, she said, but it's first come, first serve. By the time Aaliyah reached the counter, the vouchers were gone. Her voice trembled. Please, just somewhere we can stay, even a corner. I'm sorry, ma'am. The airport doesn't allow overnight stays. The world seemed to tilt. She turned away, blinking back, the sting in her eyes. She spotted a row of metal benches, cold hard, but free. She lowered Noah gently onto one, draping her coat over him. He sighed in his sleep, cheeks flushed from fever. For a moment, Aaliyah just sat there, shoulders sagging, palms pressed to her knees. The kind of quiet that comes after too much trying. And then, that voice again. Calm, certain, unmistakable. This won't do. She looked up. The stranger stood before her. No luggage, no pretense. His tie was loosened, his eyes softer now, though still carrying that invisible weight. We'll manage, she said quickly. You've already done enough. He didn't argue, just paused, watching her son. Then he spoke low and deliberate. I'll cover a room. Let the boy sleep properly. Aaliyah's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to refuse. She had spent years building walls, pride, survival, independence. But then Noah coughed, his small body trembling, and those walls began to crack. She whispered almost to herself, He just needs a bed. Exactly, the man said simply. Something in his tone, not pity, not pressure, made her believe he meant it. The hotel lobby glowed with polished marble and soft jazz, a world far from the one Aaliyah belonged to. Her shoes squeaked faintly against the floor as she followed him, in clutching Noah. The staff greeted him with familiarity, the quiet deference given to wealth. He checked in with practiced ease, signing papers, sliding a card across the counter. Aaliyah stood behind him, half hidden, feeling both gratitude and discomfort twist together inside her. When the elevator doors closed, the two of them stood in silence. The mirrored walls reflected two very different lives, his neat, tailored composure, and her weary reflection, holding a sleeping child. He glanced down, once catching her eyes in the glass. You don't have to be afraid, he said quietly. I'm not expecting anything in return. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. People always say that she murmured until they don't. He didn't answer, but the faintest shadow crossed his face as though her words had struck something he couldn't hide. The room was warm, the sheets crisp, the air carrying a faint scent of lavender. Aaliyah laid Noah on the bed, covering him gently. He curled toward her hand, breathing evenly now. You'll sleep here, the man said, setting the keycard on the table. It's under your name. No one will disturb you. You've already done more than enough, she said softly. He hesitated, the first hint of uncertainty in a man who seemed built of control. I saw a child who needed rest. That's reason enough. For a moment she thought she saw something behind his composure, exhaustion perhaps, or grief. The kind that never leaves. Before she could speak, Noah coughed again. She turned instantly, brushing his hair back. When she looked up, the man was already at the door. Get some sleep, he said, voice low. Tomorrow will make more sense. And then he was gone. But he didn't leave the hallway right away. Aaliyah heard it, a faint murmur beyond the door. She opened it slightly, her curiosity stronger than her fear. He was standing near the elevator phone, pressed to his ear. His tone was calm, but his words weren't. No, he said quietly. I couldn't save her. I tried everything, treatment, money. None of it mattered. She's gone. A pause, then softer, heavier. Maybe helping them helps me breathe again. Aaliyah's breath caught. The realization hit before she could close the door. This wasn't just generosity. This was penance. She stepped back, silently closing the door with trembling hands. For a long while, she just watched her son sleep the rise and fall of his chest. The faint hum of the heater, the echo of a stranger's confession still hanging in the air. Something had shifted, she could feel it. Kindness, yes, but beneath it, something deeper, darker. And though she didn't yet understand why, Aaliyah knew one thing, with aching certainty. This man's sorrow was somehow tangled with her own. Morning crept gently into the hotel room, the kind of light that didn't burst through curtains, but seeped softly like a quiet apology for another long night. Aaliyah opened her eyes to the faint sound of Noah's breathing beside her. His fever had eased. His little hand still rested against her arm, as if afraid that even in sleep she might slip away. For a few seconds, she just watched him. The way his lashes brushed his cheeks, the way his lips parted slightly as he dreamed. A mother's heart always counted blessings in small things, a steady breath, a cool forehead, the chance to see another morning. Then she heard it, a soft knock at the door. She rose quietly, her body heavy with fatigue, but her mind alert. When she opened it, the stranger stood there again. Alexander. He held 2 paper cups and a small brown bag. No suit jacket now, just a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled back. His hair was damp, as though he'd walked through the foggy Chicago morning, rather than sending someone else to do it. "I thought you might not have eaten," he said simply. "Bagels and fruit. The coffee's hot." Aaliyah hesitated, her instinct to refuse, battling with the memory of his voice last night. "Maybe helping them helps me breathe again." She stepped aside. "Thank you," she murmured. "You didn't have to." He entered quietly, placing the bag on the small table. "I know," he said, almost absently. "But I did." Noah stirred, sitting up with a sleepy groan. His curls stuck to his forehead, his voice raspy. "Mom, is that breakfast?" Aaliyah smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. Sit up slowly." She handed him a piece of bagel, then turned to Alexander. "You're very kind, but I need to ask why you've gone far beyond what anyone would do for a stranger." He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he watched Noah bite into the bread with small, deliberate motions. Then finally his gaze shifted to her. "I don't believe in strangers," he said quietly. "Just people whose stories I haven't learned yet." The answer might have sounded rehearsed in another man's mouth, but from him it carried the weight of truth, heavy, lived in, and fragile. Aaliyah didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, she poured the coffee he'd brought. Her fingers brushed his, for the briefest moment, a small, accidental touch that seemed to echo louder than it should. It wasn't attraction, not yet, but recognition. That unspoken understanding between 2 souls who'd been tired for far too long. Later that morning, as the snow began to fall outside, she found him in the hallway, speaking quietly on his phone. "Yes," he said, "I'll handle the board meeting remotely." "No, I don't care about the optics. Just do it." His tone was sharp, commanding. Not the soft-spoken man who'd comforted her son hours earlier, but someone used to being obeyed. When he noticed her at the end of the hall, he lowered his voice. "I'll call you back." She hesitated. "You don't have to stay. We'll catch the next flight. You've done enough." "I'm not staying because of obligation," he replied. "The storm's grounded half the city. You'll need help arranging travel." "I can manage," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "You said that yesterday too." The words weren't mocking, they were gentle, almost wistful, as if he knew too well what it meant to manage alone. That evening, the city outside the hotel turned silver beneath the snow. Inside, Aaliyah sat by the window, while Noah colored in a notepad the hotel had provided. The hum of the heater filled the silence. "Mom," Noah said suddenly, Is he your friend? Aaliyah glanced at him. Who, the man from the plane? He talks to you nice, not like the people at the office. Her throat tightened. Maybe she said softly, maybe he's someone trying to remember how to be kind. From the doorway, Alexander's voice drifted in. That sounds about right. Aaliyah turned. He was leaning lightly against the frame, holding a small box of medicine. For his fever, just in case, he said. The pharmacy downstairs didn't have the syrup, but this will help. Noah grinned. Thanks, mister. Alexander's mouth curved in a rare, soft smile. You can call me Alex if you want. The boy nodded seriously, the way children do when they've just made an important friend. When Noah finally fell asleep that night, Aaliyah sat in the quiet room, her gaze lingering on the man across from her. He'd stayed, not intruding, not speaking much, just sitting there in silence, as if the stillness itself was a kind of prayer. She studied him, this contradiction of a man poised and powerful, yet carrying a loneliness so deep it seemed to hum beneath his every word. You don't sleep much, do you? She asked softly. His eyes met hers. Not when I can't forget. The answer made her heart ache, because she understood it too well. Forgetting wasn't something the broken learned easily. He turned back toward the window, watching snowflakes dissolve against the glass. She used to love the snow, he said suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. Aaliyah frowned slightly. My sister, he said after a pause. She was sick for a long time. The company I worked for, my father's company, denied her coverage for an experimental treatment. We could have saved her. But rules are rules. Profits are profits. His hands tightened in his lap. She died, and I stayed quiet. Aaliyah didn't speak. The silence between them filled with the sound of the city breathing, below distant horns, soft wind, the hum of life continuing even when hearts stopped. Finally, she said, That's why you helped us, isn't it? Because of her. He didn't deny it. You reminded me of what it looks like when someone keeps fighting. I forgot how that looked. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the tailored calm, a soul still bleeding beneath layers of guilt and good intentions. She wanted to hate him for his privilege, for the doors that opened before him without effort. But she couldn't. Not when he looked at her that way, like someone seeing a reflection of his own mistakes and still daring to hope there might be redemption. Later, as the snow thickened outside, Aaliyah turned off the lamp. She sat in the dark for a while, listening to Noah's steady breathing. The faint light from the window caught Alexander's profile, the straight line of his jaw, the weariness etched into the corners of his mouth. Do you ever wish you could start over? She asked quietly, not expecting an answer. He looked at her, then, eyes gray and tired. Every morning, he said. And some nights I almost believe I have. For a long time, neither of them moved. The distance between their chairs felt both impossible and paper-thin. Outside, Chicago kept snowing, endless, gentle, forgiving. And inside that quiet room, two strangers who had carried their loneliness like armor began, for the first time in years, to lay it down. Morning crept gently into the hotel room, the kind of light that didn't burst through curtains, but seeped softly like a quiet apology for another long night. Aaliyah opened her eyes to the faint sound of Noah's breathing beside her. His fever had eased. His little hand still rested against her arm, as if afraid that even in sleep she might slip away. For a few seconds, she just watched him. The way his lashes brushed his cheeks, the way his lips parted slightly as he dreamed. A mother's heart always counted blessings, in small things, a steady breath, a cool forehead, the chance to see another morning. Then she heard a soft knock at the door. She rose quietly, her body heavy with fatigue, but her mind alert. When she opened it, the stranger stood there again. Alexander. He held 2 paper cups and a small brown bag. No suit jacket now, just a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled back. His hair was damp, as though he'd walked through the foggy Chicago morning, rather than sending someone else to do it. "I thought you might not have eaten," he said simply. "Bagels and fruit. The coffee's hot." Aaliyah hesitated, her instinct to refuse, battling with the memory of his voice last night. "Maybe helping them helps me breathe again." She stepped aside. "Thank you," she murmured. "You didn't have to." He entered quietly, placing the bag on the small table. "I know," he said, almost absently, "but I did." Noah stirred, sitting up with a sleepy groan. His curls stuck to his forehead, his voice raspy. "Mom, is that breakfast?" Aaliyah smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. Sit up slowly." She handed him a piece of bagel, then turned to Alexander. "You're very kind. But I need to ask why you've gone far beyond what anyone would do for a stranger." He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he watched Noah bite into the bread with small, deliberate motions. Then finally his gaze shifted to her. "I don't believe in strangers," he said quietly. "Just people whose stories I haven't learned yet." The answer might have sounded rehearsed in another man's mouth, but from him it carried the weight of truth, heavy, lived in, and fragile. Aaliyah didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, she poured the coffee he'd brought. Her fingers brushed his for the briefest moment, a small accidental touch that seemed to echo louder than it should. It wasn't attraction, not yet, but recognition. That unspoken understanding between 2 souls who'd been tired for far too long. Later that morning, as the snow began to fall outside, she found him in the hallway speaking quietly on his phone. "Yes," he said, "I'll handle the board meeting remotely." "No, I don't care about the optics. Just do it." His tone was sharp, commanding. Not the soft-spoken man who'd comforted her son hours earlier, but someone used to being obeyed. When he noticed her at the end of the hall, he lowered his voice. "I'll call you back." She hesitated. "You don't have to stay. We'll catch the next flight. You've done enough." "I'm not staying because of obligation," he replied. "The storm's grounded half the city. You'll need help arranging travel." "I can manage," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "You said that yesterday, too." The words weren't mocking. They were gentle, almost wistful, as if he knew too well what it meant to manage alone. That evening, the city outside the hotel turned silver beneath the snow. Inside, Aaliyah sat by the window while Noah colored in a notepad the hotel had provided. The hum of the heater filled the silence. "Mom." Noah said suddenly, "Is he your friend?" Aaliyah glanced at him. "Who, the man from the plane? He talks to you nice. Not like the people at the office." Her throat tightened. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe he's someone trying to remember how to be kind." From the doorway, Alexander's voice drifted in. "That sounds about right." Aaliyah turned. He was leaning lightly against the frame, holding a small box of medicine. "For his fever, just in case," he said. "The pharmacy downstairs didn't have the syrup, but this will help." Noah grinned. "Thanks, mister." Alexander's mouth curved in a rare, soft smile. "You can call me Alex if you want." The boy nodded seriously, the way children do when they've just made an important friend. When Noah finally fell asleep that night, Aaliyah sat in the quiet room, her gaze lingering on the man across from her. He'd stayed, not intruding, not speaking much, just sitting there in silence, as if the stillness itself was a kind of prayer. She studied him, this contradiction of a man poised and powerful, yet carrying a loneliness so deep it seemed to hum beneath his every word. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked softly. His eyes met hers. "Not when I can't forget." The answer made her heart ache, because she understood it too well. Forgetting wasn't something the broken learned easily. He turned back toward the window, watching snowflakes dissolve against the glass. "She used to love the snow," he said, suddenly voice, barely above a whisper. Aaliyah frowned slightly. My sister," he said after a pause. She was sick for a long time. The company I worked for, my father's company, denied her coverage for an experimental treatment. We could have saved her. But rules are rules. Profits are profits." His hands tightened in his lap. "She died, and I stayed quiet." Aaliyah didn't speak. The silence between them filled with the sound of the city, breathing below, distant horns, soft wind, the hum of life continuing even when hearts stopped. Finally she said, "That's why you helped us, isn't it?" "Because of her." He didn't deny it. "You reminded me of what it looks like when someone keeps fighting." I forgot how that looked. For the first time, she saw the man beneath the tailored calm, a soul still bleeding, beneath layers of guilt and good intentions. She wanted to hate him for his privilege, for the doors that opened before him without effort. But she couldn't. Not when he looked at her that way, like someone seeing a reflection of his own mistakes, and still daring to hope there might be redemption. Later, as the snow thickened outside, Aaliyah turned off the lamp. She sat in the dark for a while, listening to Noah's steady breathing. The faint light from the window caught Alexander's profile, the straight line of his jaw, the weariness etched into the corners of his mouth. "Do you ever wish you could start over?" she asked quietly, not expecting an answer. He looked at her, then eyes gray and tired. "Every morning," he said. "And some nights, I almost believe I have." For a long time, neither of them moved. The distance between their chairs felt both impossible and paper-thin. Outside, Chicago kept snowing, endless, gentle, forgiving. And inside that quiet room, two strangers who had carried their loneliness like armor began, for the first time in years, to lay it down. Seattle's sky was gray and swollen with rain, the kind that seemed to seep into the bones of the city. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone facade streaked with water, the air thick with the scent of damp asphalt and tension. Aaliyah stood at the entrance, her hand clutching Noah's, as though letting go would undo everything she had fought for. Her old coat clung to her shoulders, its hem frayed from years of wear. She could hear the echo of her heels on the marble floor, sharp against the hush of the corridor. Alexander walked beside her, silent but steady. He carried no briefcase, no umbrella, just the same calm gravity that followed him everywhere. Yet something about his face was different today, harder, quieter, as if he had already rehearsed a loss he couldn't bear to repeat. "You don't have to come in," she said softly. "You've done enough." He looked at her, then his gray eyes like winter water. "You shouldn't have to walk in there alone." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Inside the courtroom, the air was sharp with paper and old wood. Aaliyah sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the aisle sat James Carter, her ex-husband, immaculately dressed, his smirk as polished as his cufflinks. When he caught her gaze, he leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Still stubborn, huh, Aaliyah? You could have saved yourself the trouble if you'd just signed the papers." She ignored him, but inside her stomach twisted. The judge entered, a middle-aged woman with clear eyes and a voice that filled the room. "We are here to review the property claim of Carter versus Brooks." Both parties present. James's lawyer, Rose. First, smooth, confident. Your Honor, my client has provided documentation proving full ownership of the residence in question. The defendant voluntarily relinquished her share during divorce proceedings. A stack of papers landed on the judge's bench with a slap that sounded like a verdict already sealed. Aaliyah's throat tightened. Those signatures, those were hers and yet not hers. She remembered the day she had refused to sign the pen, trembling in her hand. She had walked away that day. So how could they exist now? Her lawyer, David Lane, rose slowly. Your Honor. He began evenly. Those documents are forgeries. We have handwriting analysis to prove it, along with evidence of unauthorized bank withdrawals in the plaintiff's name. The judge nodded, but her gaze flicked toward Aaliyah, measuring the tremor in her composure. Then came the words that would decide everything. Mrs. Brooks, please take the stand. She stood, her knees unsteady. As she walked to the witness chair, her eyes found Alexander's across the room. He gave her a small, silent nod, one that seemed to whisper, "Teddy now. You've already survived worse." The clerk swore her in, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She spoke without fear. 5 years ago, she began, voice trembling but growing steadier. With each word, I trusted James Carter, with everything I had. My savings, my home, my family. He left when I was 7 months pregnant, and since then, I've raised my son alone. Her voice softened, but her gaze didn't waver. Every dollar I earned came from cleaning offices after dark, from double shifts in places where no one remembers your name. That house was the one place my son could sleep without worry. It isn't just walls and a roof. It's the only piece of dignity we've managed to keep. James shifted uncomfortably. His lawyer frowned. I didn't sign those papers, she continued, lifting her chin, because I promised my son that no one would ever take our home again. Not even his father. The courtroom was silent. Even the air seemed to hold still. David approached the bench, setting down a folder. Your Honor. We've also obtained records of financial transactions linking Mr. Carter to a shell company used to falsify property transfers. The company Montrose Holdings was recently acquired by Pierce Financial. At the sound of that name, Aaliyah froze. Her eyes darted instinctively toward Alexander. He sat perfectly still, but his jaw tightened, just enough to betray what she already knew. The judge looked up. Pierce Financial, yes, David said carefully. Founded under the late Richard Pierce, currently consolidated under his son, Mr. Alexander Pierce. The words struck the room like thunder, muffled by velvet. Aaliyah's breath faltered. The connection was there, exposed under the cold light of truth. The same company that had once denied her mother's treatment was now tangled in her ex-husband's deceit. And the man who had stood beside her, who had carried her son through the storm, bore that same name. She looked at Alexander. He didn't speak. He didn't look away. Her lawyer's voice faded into background noise. All she could hear was the echo of her own heartbeat, the weight of history folding in on itself. When the judge called for recess, the gallery broke into whispers. David leaned toward her. Are you all right? Aaliyah nodded faintly, though her eyes were glassy. I just need a moment. She stepped out into the hallway, her hand gripping the cool marble wall for balance. Her chest felt tight, but her tears didn't fall. Not yet. Behind her, the sound of footsteps. Aaliyah. She didn't turn. You knew, she said softly. Yes. Her voice trembled. And you let me believe you were just a stranger on a plane. He paused, his voice low, almost a confession. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I could help, maybe what she whispered, turning to face him. That kindness could erase the past. He flinched, the pain raw in his eyes. No. That maybe I could do one thing right before everything else I've done wrong consumes me. For a long time, they just stood there. Two people bound by grief. Neither had chosen standing in a corridor that smelled faintly of rain and antiseptic, and everything unspoken. Finally, she said, "Go back inside. Finish what you started. I'll face him. You face yourself." And with that, she walked past him, head-high steps, steady, heartbreaking quietly inside her chest. Back in the courtroom, the storm was far from over. But this time when Aaliyah sat down, she didn't look small. She didn't look afraid. Across the aisle, James Carter smirked again. But when Alexander rose to stand beside her, his voice clear, unguarded, resolute, that smirk began to fade. For the first time, Aaliyah wasn't fighting alone. And neither was he. Rain streaked across the courthouse windows, like watercolor tears, blurring the sharp lines of the city beyond. Inside, the air felt heavy. Too much truth had already been spoken, and yet too much remained unsaid. Aaliyah sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table. Her fingers knotted together, the rhythm of her pulse echoing in her wrists. Across the aisle, James and his lawyer whispered urgently, the smugness from earlier, now cracked and faltering. But her eyes weren't on them. They were on Alexander. He stood at the edge of the courtroom, silent, motionless, the faint light catching on his profile. He looked like a man built out of calm, but she had seen what lived beneath it now. Not arrogance, not detachment, but guilt. And for the first time, she wasn't sure which was harder to carry, the betrayal or the understanding. The judge's voice broke through the hush. "This court will now resume proceedings." David, her lawyer, rose. "Your Honor, the defense has submitted a request to question the origin of Montrose Holdings, the company involved in the falsified property documents." The judge adjusted her glasses. "Proceed." David turned to face the room. Montrose Holdings was originally funded through a subsidiary of Pierce Financial, the same corporation responsible for several denied medical insurance claims, including those affecting Mrs. Brooks's late mother. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Aaliyah's heart thudded once hard. The name Pierce filled the air like smoke, inescapable, familiar. Cruel. David continued, his tone careful. "While there is no evidence of Mr. Alexander Pierce's personal involvement in this specific fraud, his company's name appears repeatedly across these transactions." The judge turned her attention toward Alexander. "Mr. Pierce, would you like to make a statement for the record?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then he stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. "I would, Your Honor." Aaliyah's eyes met his. He looked at her briefly, not for courage, but as if to silently ask permission to speak the truth aloud. Then his voice filled the room, low, controlled every word, chosen like it mattered. "Pierce Financial Holdings was built on my father's vision," he began. "A vision that valued profit over people. I inherited it when he died, not by choice, but by blood. I thought I could fix it from within. I was wrong." He paused, his throat tightening. The stillness in the courtroom deepened. The woman sitting in this room, Mrs. Brooks, lost her mother because of a decision made under that company's name. My name. I didn't know then, but ignorance doesn't absolve responsibility. I have carried that truth since the day I found her case file. A soft gasp came from the gallery. The judge leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Alexander continued, his tone quieter now. "I didn't come here as a benefactor. I came because every time I sign a contract, every time I see the word approved, I wonder whose life that signature will break next. Helping her isn't penance. It's the only part of myself I still recognize. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the sound of rain outside seemed to still. Then softly the judge said, "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. You may sit." He nodded and returned to his place. Aaliyah's eyes burned, but she blinked the tears away. He had not defended himself. He had not excused the past. He had simply placed his guilt beside her pain and let both exist in the open air. When the recess was called, the corridors filled with the buzz of whispers and shuffling footsteps. Aaliyah stepped outside, needing air, needing space. The rain had eased into a drizzle. She walked toward the courthouse steps, the damp air cool against her skin. Behind her, she heard the door open. Alexander's voice followed softly. "You shouldn't be alone right now." She didn't turn. "I've been alone a long time. I know how to do it." He stepped closer, his shoes silent against the wet stone. "You think I don't know what that feels like?" Her laugh came out hollow. "You don't. You had power choices, a name that opened doors. All I had was my mother's faith and a system that shut her out." He didn't argue. Instead, his voice broke just slightly. "I know what it's like to watch someone you love fade while you stand helpless behind glass walls built by your own family's wealth." That stopped her. She turned slowly. For a moment, she saw not the billionaire whose name hung over every headline, but the man behind it, haunted, undone human. "Your sister," she said quietly. He nodded once, eyes lowered. "I tried to save her, but every attempt reminded me of all the others we hadn't saved before her, including your mother." The rain had soaked through his hair now, but he didn't move, didn't wipe it away. Aaliyah looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not arrogance, not guilt alone, but grief that mirrored her own. And though forgiveness was still far away, something shifted between them, a fragile bridge not yet built, but no longer broken. Inside, the judge reconvened the court. The final arguments were made. Evidence presented, signatures dissected, truths laid bare. When it was over, the judge's gavel struck wood sharp and final. Based on the evidence provided, this court rules in favor of Mrs. Brooks. Full ownership of the property remains under her name. The words hung in the air, simple, solid, irrevocable. Aaliyah exhaled, the breath trembling out of her chest, like a prayer she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Noah, sitting with a family friend in the back row, clapped softly before being hushed. Across the aisle, James slumped in his chair, the bravado gone from his face. But Aaliyah didn't look at him. Her eyes found Alexander again, standing quietly near the doorway, rain still glistening on his coat. He didn't smile. He only nodded, as though the verdict had set her free but left him exactly where he'd been all along, inside the quiet prison of his conscience. And as the courtroom emptied, she realized that the story wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about two people bound by the same wound from opposite sides of it, one trying to heal the other, trying to atone. And sometimes, in the strange and fragile way of life, that was enough for a beginning. The Seattle sky was clearing after days of relentless rain. Clouds drifted apart like curtains slowly drawn back, revealing a fragile blue that seemed almost shy after so much gray. Down on the courthouse steps, Aaliyah stood still, her coat clinging to her shoulders, her breath fogging faintly in the crisp air. It was over, the case, the fear, the long months of fighting. She had won. But victory, she realized, was quieter than she imagined. It didn't roar, it whispered. Noah ran ahead, laughing as he jumped into a shallow puddle. His laughter rang out like sunlight, breaking through the heaviness that had followed her for so long. Alexander watched from a few steps away, his hands buried in his coat pockets. When Noah splashed too close to the edge of the sidewalk, he stepped forward instinctively, steadying the boy with one large, gentle hand. "Careful there, champ," he said softly. Noah grinned up at him. "You sound like my mom." Alexander's mouth curved, not quite into a smile, but something close. "She's a wise woman." Aaliyah's heart twisted at the sight, her son, her rescuer, her past and her present, all standing together in one small, impossible frame. Later that afternoon, they sat in a small cafe not far from the courthouse. The rain had returned in the gentlest way, tapping against the window like an old friend, too polite to intrude. Aaliyah stirred her tea, the spoon clinking softly. Alexander sat across from her, his untouched coffee cooling by the minute. Between them lay a silence that felt less like distance and more like the pause before confession. He broke it first. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about everything that came to light today, about Pierce Financial, about what comes next." Aaliyah looked up, her eyes steady. "You plan to walk away?" He shook his head. "No. I plan to burn it down." She frowned. "You mean I'm dismantling it?" "All of it. The subsidiaries, the shell firms, the manipulative contracts. I'll build something different in its place." He exhaled slowly, his gaze turning toward the rain. "A foundation for those who were denied help. For people like your mother. Like you." The words carried no grandeur, no show of philanthropy. They felt simple and real. Aaliyah watched him carefully. "You'd give up everything your family built." His jaw tightened slightly. "It was never mine to keep. My father built an empire of profit. I'd rather build a legacy of repair." The conviction in his tone was quiet, but absolute, and for the first time she saw not the billionaire in the tailored suit, but the man beneath it, weary, flawed, and utterly sincere. Her voice softened. "You can't undo the past, Alexander." "I know," he said. "But maybe we can stop it from repeating." Days passed. The city's rhythm resumed, buses groaning at stoplights, shopkeepers sweeping rain from their doorways, children chasing one another down sidewalks slick with puddles. Life, in all its stubborn grace, went on. Aaliyah returned to work at the clinic part-time, her first steady job in years. She came home tired, but content, the kind of exhaustion that came with purpose. One evening, as she packed Noah's lunch for the next day, she found an envelope slipped beneath her door. Inside was a single letter on heavy paper, no company seal, just her name in a firm, familiar hand. Pierce Foundation for Healthcare Equity Official Charter, in memory of Eleanor Brooks, her mother's name. She sat down slowly, the paper trembling between her fingers. The text below was brief, a mission statement outlining a fund for families denied medical coverage due to unethical policy constraints. The first donation had already been made anonymously, but the signature at the bottom wasn't anonymous. Alexander R. Pierce. Her chest ached with something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude was too small a word, forgiveness too large. What she felt was something deeper, a quiet acceptance that even broken people could build something beautiful when they decided to stop running from their past. Weeks later, she saw him again. It was evening. The city glowed with golden lamplight, the streets still glistening from a fresh drizzle. She found him standing outside the new foundation office, the building that had once housed one of his father's subsidiaries. Now the old brass letters were gone. In their place, new ones gleamed softly under the light. The Brooks Health Initiative. He was alone. His coat collar turned up against the wind, his expression unreadable as he looked up at the sign. She approached quietly. "It suits you," she said. He turned, surprise flickering into something warmer. "It suits you more." They stood there for a moment, the city moving around them in a blur of headlights and footsteps. "I read your letter," she said softly. "I didn't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, but I will." She met his gaze. "What you're doing, it won't bring her back. Not my mother, not your sister. But it matters." He nodded, his voice low. "It's a start." Rain began to fall again, fine and silver in the streetlights. She didn't move. Neither did he. And in that quiet, in the space between them, something like peace began to take root. Not loud, not triumphant, but steady, fragile, alive. As the night deepened, they walked together along the empty street. Their shadows stretched behind them side by side until the rain blurred them into one. For the first time in years, Aaliyah didn't feel chased by the past. And for the first time in his life, Alexander didn't feel unworthy of the future. A year had passed since that rain-soaked afternoon, when justice was finally spoken aloud. Seattle had changed its color since then, brighter, somehow softer, as if the city itself had learned to breathe again. Cherry blossoms lined the streets now, their petals floating over the sidewalks like tiny pieces of mercy, falling where they may. Aaliyah Brooks walked along the familiar terminal of SeaTac Airport, one hand holding her son's, the other clutching a worn boarding pass. Her curls were shorter now, touched with the faintest glimmer of gray she no longer tried to hide. She had learned to wear time with grace. Noah, taller and louder than before, swung his small backpack in rhythm with his steps. "Mom, do you think we'll see him again?" Aaliyah smiled, faintly, eyes following the rows of glowing signs ahead. "Maybe," she said softly. "Sometimes people come back when life decides you're ready to meet them again." They found their seats near the window overlooking the tarmac. The plane they were waiting for gleamed in the spring light, its silver body reflecting the world like a mirror. Aaliyah sipped her coffee, lost in thought. It wasn't the same kind of waiting she had known a year ago, that desperate, breathless waiting filled with fear and exhaustion. This was quieter, a waiting that belonged to peace. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared. From Alexander Pierce, Gate B-17. "Are you here too?" Her lips parted, a soft, disbelieving smile spreading across them. She looked toward the far end of the hall, where travelers passed in a blur of coats and rolling suitcases. And there he was. Alexander stood near the window, the sun falling over his shoulders like a benediction. His hair was slightly longer, his suit simpler. The edges of his life had softened, like a man who had finally learned to stop running against the wind. When their eyes met, time folded in on itself. For a heartbeat, she wasn't the woman who had faced a courtroom, or the girl who had once begged an airline clerk for mercy. She was simply Aaliyah, the same soul who had once looked back in line and met the gaze of a stranger who changed her world with 4 words: "Add her ticket to mine." He approached, stopping just close enough for the air between them to hum with the quiet familiarity of everything they'd been through. "I didn't know you'd be flying today," he said, a hint of wonder in his voice. "Neither did I," she replied, smiling. Noah wanted to visit his grandmother's grave in Chicago for spring break. He said it's time to tell her we're doing all right. Alexander's eyes softened. She'd be proud. Aaliyah tilted her head. "And you, still rebuilding the world," he smiled faintly. "Trying. The foundation's growing faster than I expected. I spend more time listening than leading now. It's different." There was something new in his voice. Humility maybe, or peace. The kind of peace that only comes when a man has finally made amends with his ghosts. When boarding was called, Noah tugged on her hand. "Mom, he's on our flight." "Look." Aaliyah laughed, shaking her head as Alexander lifted his ticket. Seems life likes its circles neat, he said softly. Maybe, she replied. Or maybe some stories aren't meant to end, just change destinations. They boarded together. The sky outside was a soft watercolor blue. Clouds stretched below them like a field of dreams, endless and forgiving. Noah slept his head on his mother's shoulder. Across the aisle, Alexander looked out the window, then turned toward her. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. Aaliyah smiled, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the horizon. "Every time I hear a boarding call." He chuckled low and warm. "I think about it too. The way you stood there trying to count coins that shouldn't have had to count for anything. I think about how much courage fits into the smallest moments." She looked at him, then her eyes gentle but steady. "We all carry a moment like that, the one that changed everything." He nodded, "And if we're lucky, we learn to stop running from it." The hum of the engines filled the quiet between them, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. When the plane began its descent, sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the cabin in gold. Aaliyah turned to look at Alexander, his profile outlined against the glow, no longer the untouchable man of power, but the kind of man who had learned what power was truly for. She reached across the aisle, her fingers brushing his hand. He turned, surprised, and she said simply, "Thank you for giving us more than a ticket." He held her gaze. "You gave me something back too." "What's that?" He smiled, a small, quiet smile that reached his eyes, a reason to believe that good men can still begin again. When they landed, passengers stood and reached for their luggage, the usual flurry of impatience filling the air. But Aaliyah lingered a moment longer, watching Noah press his face to the window, whispering, "It looks just like heaven, Mom." She squeezed his shoulder, her heart swelling with something too big to name. Alexander stood beside them, waiting, unhurried. And when they walked down the narrow jet bridge together, mother, son, and man, once burdened by his past, the light ahead felt different, warmer, forgiving. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive with fanfare. It comes quietly through small hands, clutching yours, through a stranger's steady kindness, through the simple act of staying when leaving would have been easier. And sometimes, love doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins at a ticket counter with a voice that says, "Add her ticket to mine." If you believe kindness still changes lives, let it start with you today. One gesture, one word, one small act that makes someone else's sky a little clearer.